Hello everyone, and welcome to the Chai-logues by the Chai magazine, where we interview young creatives from across Southeast Asia. I'm your host, Subhi, and on today's episode, we have Aparna Verma, an author whose storytelling has captivated fantasy readers across the world. She is the author of The Phoenix King and The Burning Queen, books known for their rich Indian inspired fantasy, layered political intrigue, unforgettable characters, and emotionally immersive worlds. Originally born in Rajasthan, India, and later raised in the United States, she graduated from Stanford University with honors in the arts and a degree in English before eventually turning her passion for storytelling into a career. From self publishing her earlier work to becoming traditionally published with Orbit Books, her journey is one filled with resilience, creativity, reinvention, and an unwavering belief in her stories. Please join me in welcoming the incredibly talented Aparna Verma. Ma'am, thank you so much for being here with us today. Before we begin, would you like to introduce us to your audience in your own words?
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I honestly, that intro was fabulous. You guys are gassing me up. No, that was beautiful. I'm just excited to be here and I'm excited to talk to you and your audience.
Okay, so let's start with the questions. I'd love to know from the beginning. So, could you tell us a little about where you grew up and what your childhood was like?
Yeah. So I am originally from Rajasthan, from a really small city called Badra. And growing up, I grew up in the States, specifically in Baltimore, Maryland. And I had always had a passion for storytelling. I think being the new young kid with an accent in English speaking school definitely singled me out. I had to take very I had to take like specific English classes called ESL, um, and in order to help myself fit in, if you're the odd one out, kids bully you. So I had to go through that, and I think that's where my love for storytelling came from because I could immerse myself and transport myself to another person, another world where I was accepted and I was seen. So that's where I think I gravitated towards fantasy. Some of my favorite books growing up were, your classics, Lord of the Rings, Narnia. But then also, I really loved The Giver as a kid. Um, the Magic Treehouse books, anything that was fantastical, that's where I gravitate towards, and that's what I write now.
Okay, so very interesting having two diverse backgrounds. So, being born in India and then raised in the United States, obviously, those two cultural experiences shaped you. How did they shape you as a person, but also as a storyteller?
That's a great question. So I think many diaspora writers have said this before. And I think it's a sentiment shared among us of never really belonging to any one place. It's a classic, if I am in India and I speak in Hindi, which I'm fluent in, I obviously have an accent. So that singles me out. In America, I am visually, different than, your quote unquote white American. So I have always felt like an outsider all my life, and a lot of my characters feel this sense of being the stranger in their own land, even though you may be born to a certain place, a country, a city. I feel as if all of us, um, at some point of our life, feel like an outsider, either from our family, our community, um, our own culture. And that's something that I like to explore, how we are able to still find a sense of belonging or craft a sense of belonging by choosing, our own beliefs, carefully curating our own community. and building our own home. And that's, these are all themes that I explore in, the Ravens trilogy.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your writing background. So, growing up, were you always drawn towards stories and books, or was it something you gradually discovered over time that as you were reading books, it was also something that you wanted to write?
Yeah, I mean, I knew from a young age that I wanted to be a writer. I have always been a reader first. Books were my first love. I would spend, weekends and summers in the library. I would check out stacks of books. And when I first started writing, I remember I was in elementary school, so primary school, and I would write fanfics about Pokemon because I loved the world and I wish Ash Ketchum was a girl and she was badass and she was adventurous and, she wanted to catch them all. So, um, come a very long way from Pokemon fanfics. Um, but I've always been a writer, and I just knew when I was young that this is what I would want to do when I grow up.
So, as we're talking about fantasy as a genre, fantasy demands a lot of intense world building, emotional depth, consistency. I've seen a lot of reels on Instagram where authors spend years just trying to build the perfect worlds, and it's a lot of hard work. So, what were some of your biggest challenges you faced while writing and publishing your novels?
Yeah, so in terms of world building, um, I think there are a couple of things that writers have to keep in mind. So for the Phoenix King, I've had that book idea for over, 10 years. So the world has slowly been curating and building and marinating in my mind. And I think that's what makes it feel so lived in. Um, when you think about what creates a world, I think if you really want to understand a culture, and I say this to many people, if you want to understand a country, a culture, what are their stories? If you were to go to India, and if you were to study the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, um, some of our beautiful epics, the Vedas, right? If you were to study those classic texts, I think you would get a very strong understanding of the Indian psyche, and what our society and our culture values, even to this day. And that's because mythos storytelling really creates the cultural landscape and soul of a civilization. So that's something that I use when I world build. Many readers have commented. So at the beginning of every chapter in the Phoenix King and the Queen, I have an epigraph from an in-world text. So it might be like a quote from the Diaries of Priestess Nomu or from the Legends and Myths of Seon. And it's to create this sense of deeper history, but then also give you an idea as a reader of what are the stories that made this world, and therefore what are the cultures and moral compasses of this civilization. So, to me, the hardest thing was uh, trying to like talk about everything. My editor was like, Aparna, I can tell you've done a lot of research, and you care and, love this world very deeply, but you can't, fit in everything. And, I try to keep that in mind, especially when you're writing. You want to balance everything where it's not too heavy handed, too much info dumping with world building, and make it seem more natural as you are going through the world. So, that was, some of the difficulties and also my philosophy when it comes to world building.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I totally understand that, and I respect fantasy authors so much because I can only imagine how much effort goes into that. Now, Talking about publishing fantasy books, so were there any challenges you faced specifically while publishing your novel or maybe pitching it? And I believe your path was also going from self published to traditionally published. So, were there any challenges in that journey?
Oh, of course. Yeah. So I decided to self-publish my book, one, because I believed in the story very strongly, and I did not necessarily want to wait for gatekeepers, which are, your agent, then it's like the publisher and the editor. I just didn't want to wait for so many people to say yes, um, and wait years for that to happen. Because some authors, wait 10 plus years before they even see a single book. So I decided to self publish. And for those, who are not aware, self publishing costs money, right? From what I've learned from authors in the US side, it takes about $6,000 per book to publish, self-publish a book. And I, was just fresh out of graduating college. I didn't have a job because it was a pandemic and no one was hiring. So I was broke. My parents themselves don't have a lot of money. They are very much, we grew up as a low income family in America. And so the first difficulty and the first challenge was raising the money. And I ran a fundraiser campaign. Indiegogo is the name of the site. It's very similar to Kickstarter or GoFundMe. And uh, I spent months just trying to raise the money. I was very diligent. I remember going through my entire Facebook friends list and just messaging as many people as possible. People who I hadn't talked to in ages, because I think to me it was like, okay, the worst answer they can say is no. And somehow I was able to raise about over $7,000, and I used that to self-publish my book. So like pay for like cover designers, right? Developmental editors, late stage editing, layout design, cover design, the whole production costs. And I was able to do that because I raised the money. And then the difficulty after that was, promoting the book. Um, I luckily have a, background in marketing, and it did well on TikTok. Um, uh, Especially among the South Asian community. But then I think around that time, TikTok then got banned in India. So a lot of the community who I was trying to reach out to was also, not aware that I was trying to talk to them. But I was able to find a lot of readers, especially South Asian readers, Indian readers, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, the whole South Asian diaspora in the States, and many people connected with the book. And that's what got the attention of Orbit. They were actually the ones who we started talking maybe 1 month after the book came out. So the book came out August 31st, 2021. And I think by October, I was already in talks with an Orbit editor, Priyanka Krishan, to who later acquired and bought my books and gave me a 3-book deal. And the difficulties in trad publishing are different. I think one thing needs to be said though is that having, someone who's like us, someone who's also Indian, someone who's South Asian, who is in a position of power, aka an editor, to raise other South Asian voices and give us a spotlight was one of the most powerful and luckiest things that happened in my career. I don't think, I believe in my book strongly, and I'm very, very grateful that Priyanka also did so. And working with an Indian editor also empowered me to be more fearless in my storytelling. Um, but she then left Orbit, and I don't blame her for it. So I then had to like find, get a new editor. And so, the publishing journey is definitely up and down. Nothing, you can't take anything for granted. Nothing is ever stable. So there's always challenges, but I try to, keep my spirits up and, stay in the belief that, people are finding the book and loving the book and it will continue to find its readers.
So we've talked about the lows now. Let's talk about the highs. So what has been the biggest highlight of your career so far?
Oh my gosh. There are many highlights. I don't know if I can um, pick just one. But I've had
What would you
uh,
say is the most memorable day you've had then?
most memorable day. Oh gosh. I think meeting reader, like whenever I can meet a reader in person and they tell me how much the Phoenix King has impacted them emotionally, or the Burning Queen, that always strikes a chord, especially if the reader is Daisy. I had one reader recently send me voice notes all over Instagram and she was crying in it. And basically, there's a funeral scene in the Phoenix King, and it's very traditional. It's very somber but beautiful. And she said that um, scene really like moved her to tears because it reminded her of the funeral of her grandmother, her ba, and she had never felt herself seen, in a character before, and had never seen, the beautiful traditions of, of an Indian funeral also in a book before, and that moved her to tears. One, to be seen, but to be, very deeply um, impacted by someone's words. And so that to me, gave me chills. I had another reader reach out to me who was also an Indian reader. And she said reading The Phoenix King was a very visceral experience because in the book, the father, this is not a spoiler, but the mother dies in um, a fire, the mother of the main character. And the father, the king, has a very hard time dealing with this and accepting it. And the grief in that family, in a way, drives a distance between the father and the daughter. And she said, reading that has impacted me deeply and personally because I also lost my mother in a house fire, and my father has had a very hard time dealing with that. And I remember when I got that message, I was just, like it felt very surreal, but also horrifyingly beautiful. One, to know, like, to me, this, even though these characters are very real in my mind, um, at the end of the day, this is a work of fiction, right? I have myself have never lost a loved one in a fire, and I hope I never do. But there are readers, real people who have and who are deeply impacted by something like this. And so to have the honor, of that is something I cherish deeply. And I, applaud every reader who has reached out to me to share these, very deeply personal moments, because it takes a lot of bravery to do that. So I am just very honored and lucky to have those moments as an author.
Well, that's very, very heartbreaking in a way to hear, but also very beautiful, as you said, how these readers connect with it. And I love that because it makes the readers also feel seen in a way, because there's not a lot of representation in books as well. So when I read something that feels a little familiar, it feels comforting as well. So
Exactly.
yes, I love coming across books that are very diverse, that are very different, that actually really connect you. So I have a question.
Hmm.
There are a lot of young people who want to pursue creative careers, but they have this fear, hesitation, societal expectations, and we're all from Indian backgrounds, so obviously there's also that Indian kids are supposed to have a specific type of career as well.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people stop, that self doubt stops them from taking that leap. And it was very inspiring when you told us that you funded this book yourself and raised $6,000. That is a big, big milestone.
Yeah.
$6,000 is unimaginable for me. So a lot of people, they would hesitate before taking that leap, and many of them might as well be able to accomplish it, but it's that first step which is hard.
Yeah.
So what would you say to these people? What advice would you give them?
I The advice I would say is you have to fight for your art. Um, I think all of us are artists. We all have an artist within us, but the tragedy of it is that many beautiful artworks, novels, books will never see the light of day because people are too afraid to honor their inner artist. Um, and that is a deep tragedy. I think the world would be a better place if, if we had more artists, if we had people who honored, the creative voices inside of them and created rather than destroyed. So I would say if you have a story or a vision that you feel deeply connected to, not just, on an emotional level, but also a spiritual level where you feel as if, I cannot move on from this life if I do not say this, if I do not create this work. And if you feel so strongly about that artwork, then you owe it to yourself to make it. Whether it ever, becomes a published book or, a painting in a gallery, that's beside the point. The first audience member, the first reader is you. So you have to be the person that gives yourself a voice because the world will always try to tamp it down. You have to find like the inner warrior within yourself to take the first step to honor your voice. And I promise you, as soon as you take the first step, the universe, the gods, whoever you believe in, and if you even if you don't believe in anything, I do believe that the world will move itself to help you deliver your vision. There's that for people who follow me on social media know I love Om Shanti Om. And there's that one dialogue scene with Shah Rukh Khan where he does his like award speech. Do you guys remember that scene?
Yeah, I do.
Right? And he talks about how the if you desire something so deeply, if you cherish it so deeply, then the entire universe will conspire to bring it to you. And that is something that I believe in. And I think that it is true. And if you have a art, or a story that you deeply love and care for and want to bring to reality, then the world will move itself to bring it into being. But you have to take the first step.
That is beautiful advice. Um, I hope that will impact some reader somewhere, and hopefully they'll take the first step.
I hope
And
so
now
too.
finally, and finally, this is the last question that we ask to all of our guests. So, as we are the Chai magazine, what is your favorite drink or beverage?
Adrak wali chai, I think is the best. Everyone has their own chai recipe and swears it's better than all the rest. And I am one of those people. I always love adraki chai. Like I will have it, in the winter, I'll have it in the summer, any time of the year. That's my favorite go-to drink. It's just so comforting.
Absolutely. It is very, very comforting. So that was the last question. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us and sharing your journey. And thank you to everyone watching or listening to this episode of Chai-logues by the Chai Magazine. We hope this conversation stayed with you, inspired you, and maybe even encouraged you to chase the stories living inside your heart. Thank you once again, and we'll see you in the next episode.